My talk for this morning is entitled Tarot, Psychology of Spiritual Illumination. Good title. I can say anything. That's what I like, freedom. Because I'm sure most of you know, if not all of you, that tarot, being, in a sense, an infinite science in terms of psychology and philosophy, if we get a good enough general title like that, we can cover any aspect that the Spirit brings up. And of course, as I hope most of you know, I hope all of you will know it before this morning is over, the Spirit, when we get together, happens to be us. Not you, just you, or not me, just me, or any one of the others. But when we get together, we form a sort of spiritual vehicle, just like a complex body can express something far more amazing and impossible as well as improbable. In the same manner, when we get together, and we get together in a special manner, that is, truly and sincerely aspiring together, which we do, or we wouldn't be here, we form a vortex of force, which brings in something far more potent than it would otherwise. Actually, this happens in just about any group where you have true aspirants. I do grant this. But you have different degrees of force, don't you? You have the kind of force that works in a combustion engine when you're using gasoline. You have the kind of force that works far more potently when you're using larger types of motors, more complex motors even. And you certainly have far more intense force when you go up the scale and start using that which we call the atomic energy. So there are different scales of force. And when we recall that Jesus said, where two or more are gathered in my name, there am I amongst them, we should realize that this was merely a Kabbalistic statement. I shouldn't say merely, actually. Nevertheless, it was a Kabbalistic statement that refers to the fact that where we join together consciously with deliberate intent to cooperate as a unity, we certainly have something that can come in, that cannot come in under other conditions. Some of us, during certain periods of our lives, have been what we may have called lone aspirants. I was one of those, you know. I had too much contempt for groups, being very, very young indeed. And when we're young, we know everything, we have contempt, we can look down on all sorts of things with such intense self-righteousness. And it's a very comfortable feeling, of course. Nevertheless, as we get older, we sort of degenerate. And by the time we're 30, we degenerate quite a bit, very often. That we start realizing there's more to knowledge and wisdom than we were so sure of in the younger periods of a particular incarnation. And so, keeping this idea in mind, I know that though many of us have gone through certain periods of our lives as more or less lone wolves in spiritual aspiration, picking up books, working at least in a vague sort of way on some of the suggestions the books have given, or going to certain meetings and deciding to try one idea that the speaker or the head of the group may have suggested. We have, at the same time, certainly not been willing to tie ourselves up, many of us, with any particular group. And in a way, this has been good, although incidentally, it's not good if you refer the idea here. But it is good for you if you still feel that way, if you haven't come to realize that when you are ready for the higher teachings, for the higher training, you cannot do it alone, no matter what anyone tells you. God is one, and everything that lives is a unity. And we need each other, those of us who approximate certain vibratory spiritual levels. We need each other for strength. We need each other for help. We need each other to form a special vortex so that inspiration can come, pretty much like we need a special type of electrical gadget. I always call all these things gadgets, being a woman, you understand. In order to bring in an extra load of electricity into a house or a factory or a plant, you try bringing more electrical energy into a certain area or system than you have wiring for. And you know what happens. You have an explosion, or at the worst, with a fire. You certainly have a blowout of the fuses where you can't do a thing. And of course you're lucky if just a fuse blows out, because you can replace it. But when you have a fire, it's pretty bad with the explosion, and we have these different degrees. So we all come to a point in our spiritual growth where we have to understand and realize that even though every human being has to attain his or her own understanding and illumination, at the same time, when we get beyond a certain point in our growth, we cannot do it alone. And then we start on a really dangerous path. Because here we realize, or perhaps some of us don't realize it, but the divine soul does, guides us towards it. We fight it tooth and nail. I certainly did. I believe in fighting until God gets you down. Then you give up and say to God, okay, you win. Now we're ready for the next step. I think that we incorporate the things we learn a little more completely. It isn't as surface. It lasts. At any rate, we do get to a point where we realize that even though it is true, each and every one of us have to work for ourselves and attain for ourselves, we still cannot do it without each other, or at least without each other in reference to those who approximate our own level. Just like we cannot bring in an extra load of electricity without having extra fuses or the whatever it takes to bring in this extra load of power. Now, when we come to understand this, of course, we develop a yearning for group work that is a little different from the more primitive yearnings. In the more primitive yearnings, we are all social creatures, which we should be, because the intuition knows that we are one, whether we include both the highest and lowest levels or not. The most savage human being, as well as the most saintly and attained and spiritualized human being, are not separated. We are one. Just like a string would be one, even though you might have two ends to it. Just like the earth is one, even though you have to go around to prove it, to prove that it isn't separate, one part from the other. It's actually one. And we do have to come to recognize this, of course. Nevertheless, in tarot, we have something that I think is the most staggering method to help us attain these realizations that has yet been devised by man. Now, when I say devised by man, I am not separating God from man. You see, some people, in fact, unfortunately, most people, think of God and spirit as one thing, and man, as well as physical matter, as another. There's dualism. They separate this. But in Kabbalah, and certainly in the whole training of the tarot, which has been incorporated into Kabbalah, which is what you might call the psychological, spiritual aspect of Kabbalistic training in the Western mysteries. In Kabbalah, we make it very clear indeed, very clear, that every single human being is an aspect of one thing, and you can call it divine life, God, the universal cosmic self, the higher self, any word you like, as long as it gives the idea, cosmic principle. Doesn't matter what you want to call a thing. A thing is what it is when we think of reality. And so the idea of being separate one from the other is, of course, the greatest fallacy of all. However, the recognition that we are all unique, and therefore in different areas, different levels, as well as having a different quality of awareness, this too must be understood. So that the ability to start working in unison with those who are of like mind, like heart, like spirit, this is a vital part of growth. Once we reach the point where we have assimilated, absorbed everything we can alone. You know, the single cell, some people, I understand, complain when I bring in science, which would be a great mistake, really, because modern science, or material science, is, after all, one side of a coin when we think of the other side as the spiritual and the universal awareness. They are not a separate thing. They have to be brought together and seen as one thing. And we are the centers of God who have to do it. So I hope that we haven't still got so much escapism in our makeup that we want to think of God and attainment and spiritual illumination as taking us away from this cruel, cold world, this terrible illusion or delusion. I hope we've reached a point where we love God and ourselves and each other so much that we realize that what we want to do is experience illumination, real illumination, and be able to let it illumine these dark recesses of our being and the beings of others, so that we can see them the way they are, instead of the shadows we've cast. And in this manner, we can start doing something about what's wrong with our own makeup. And it isn't that it's wrong, it's just that it isn't developed yet. But at least our own makeup and the makeup of others, of life. Therefore, this unity of activity, the ability to decide I have to work with a group, this actually is a step beyond the need to work alone. And of course, it's usually confused with an even more immature step, because when we're very young, we must work with others. We don't dare work alone when we're very young. Then we get to a point where we become individualized, and that's when we sort of really raise a little, you know what, let's call it Cain, but you can use an H if you like. And when we get to that point, that raising a little Cain, we decide that the differences between us, the loneliness, the aloneness, this is the only thing that we can really count on, actually. We decide that everybody is alone, and only people alone can attain anything. And usually we dramatize this, and we go through quite a few incarnations where we fulfill our aloneness very beautifully, until we practically die of loneliness, incidentally, which is required. And then we start appreciating humanity, life, from another level. That is, we start putting quality into the appreciation. We stop dramatizing this marvelousness of being alone, which we usually do during a stage where we are actually attempting to individualize ourselves a little more fully. Because remember, the primitive is quite psychic, quite telepathically attuned with others. The usual member of a primitive society is not at all bad in, for example, forecasting the future, telling you what is occurring from telepathic awareness at a distance. And are you going to call this spiritual? It is neither spiritual nor unspiritual. It is a power that everyone has. Everyone. Only some are aware and some are not. And usually we are aware when we are primitives, just like little creatures or animals are aware of this in another way, but certainly not with the intellectual analysis that comes later. And then we become aware of the same principle from a higher arc, because evolution is a spiral circle, and tarot is what helps to teach us to understand the difference between the psychic awarenesses that are part of our need to be together, then of this rebellion, where we decide we have to be lone wolves because everybody else is a something or other, or they can't understand us, even maybe they're not a something or other, so we'll sometimes dramatize our spirituality and decide they're probably marvelous, only they don't understand us. And so we walk through sadness. I remember so well the woman who came to me having read a book by a very well-known writer in occultism, where the expression, the path of the lonely ones, was used. And she came to me and she sat on the couch, and she went into the most glorious ecstasy of grief you ever heard, as she rocked back and forth and said, I know now, and the tears were pouring down her face. I am destined to travel the path of the lonely ones, the lonely ones. That is what's for me. That's the only way to attain. I have to travel the path of the lonely ones. I never saw anyone having a more marvelous time. She was so caught up in this glorious dramatization. She did it well, too, and she knew it. And if I didn't have a little perception on the inner planes, I'd have gotten caught up with it and went with her, I can assure you. It was that good. I mean, I like people who do things well, of course. And yet this was the same woman who had come to me, about 2 months previously, and had decided what she needs is a husband, and then complained that every husband in the neighborhood had started to chase her, you see. So, so you see, she went from one extreme to the other. Why? Because of an emotional instability. Now, in tarot, emotional instability, if you really continue to work with it, doesn't remain very long. Of course, this particular woman didn't remain very long either. She was very disposed towards seeking anything, everything that would bring things easily. And so she kept rushing from place to place, dramatizing her complete sincerity. And after a few meetings and managing to get the attention of whoever the head might be, you see, I got caught up in the trap with promises of all kinds of help and aid. Off she went, ecstatically, grieving, weeping, sobbing, yearning to the next place, promising all and reaching for all. Now, in tarot, we learn very quickly, really, that you have to remain stabilized and use your own powers. And you have to learn also, and tarot teaches it to you when you are willing to work with these psychological principles of the ancients, you learn that even though you have to do work on yourself, you still need to join with others of your brethren to bring in enough power to change these damnable patterns. And I'm not cussing. At least that's what I'll claim. Because that's what they are. Damnable patterns of old thinking, old feeling that keeps us tied to the unhappiness and the nonsense. And keeping us tied, we keep repeating and repeating. We're caught in a trap, like a needle caught in the groove of a record, that's gotten old. It cannot get out of it. And what will help it get out of the groove when it's caught? Only the energy of something else. When your needle is caught in any record player, because the record's gotten too old and that pattern has gotten too deep in that spot, you have to give it a little push, don't you? And if you don't, you push it and push it. Of course, if you'd let it sort of dig a little deep grooves in the others, if you were really good enough, you might get the record back into some kind of shape. On the whole, usually, you have to give the record up, don't you? And get another one. Now, in the mystery training, we help you to discover these grooves where you can do something about changing the grooves by either bringing the other qualities of your nature into harmony with that groove. This is just an analogy, remember, so don't take it too far. Or doing something to fill in this groove in some way or other so that it all works harmoniously again. And, as I pointed out to you, getting out of certain grooves, we cannot do it alone. Nor can we do it if we go to the wrong place or work with the wrong kind of thinking and feeling. Because we have to do it in a very specialized manner. In other words, what we have to do is become aware of what we are manufacturing with the creative mind of divinity, which is our mind. What we are manufacturing. We have to become aware of it, and we have to learn how to change the quality of what we're manufacturing. A little change here, a little change there. Not the basic drive, incidentally, not even the aspiration. It's the quality that's really involved here. And so the actual psychology of Kabbalah, which utilizes the tarot for its transmutational processes, has to do with helping us to create different kinds of images and how to align ourselves or identify ourselves with these different images, because only so do we change anything. For instance, some of you may have been married half a dozen times for all I know. If you have, I say, well, God bless you, at least you keep trying. And this is good, you're still in life. You still have enough courage to make mistakes. All right, now, if this is a wrong idea and if this shocks your moral point of view, it's sad. But isn't that better than one who's afraid to marry at all, afraid to be hurt at all, afraid to love at all? And how many people are afraid to love? Now, how much growing are they going to do? I can assure you the one who's married half a dozen times is going to do a great deal more growing. Not that I recommend it. I believe in monogamy. When we evolve to it, well, that's why let's evolve to it. The point is, the one who at least is willing to grow is going to bring about the experiences of pain, tears. The lack of discrimination will show up and they will grow. But the human being who is so afraid of being hurt that he will protect himself, or she will protect herself, from experiences that might bring pain, these people are not as alive. They're pretty dead. They're fastened in some old pattern, some hurt that they keep repeating, and so we get caught in the records, you see. we keep repeating our mistakes. I'll bet that at least 3/4 of you have repeated the same mistake over and over again, more than once. And I'll bet that of that 3/4, another 3/4 have thought they got over that terrible pattern and said, now I see it, and I freed myself. And then you got into more trouble than ever after you decided you'd overcome something. I mean, I know this is so. I can see, and even if I didn't see with inner perception, I'd know it just by knowing human nature and what it's like, although I see it in both ways. So you see, the getting out of old patterns, and this is what keeps us miserable. It's not simple, and yet it's doable and can be made a very happy experience, provided we have reached the stage in our own evolution where we are capable of joining ourselves with others in humor, in acceptance. That Tarot insists on this. You know, Tarot Key 15, the devil. Well, we insist on being able to look into ourselves and say, this is devilish of me, and chuckle, at the same time yearning to become an angel, which we are really, but to become it consciously and actively. With the Tarot Keys, then, we have a method where we can start getting at the root of an image. And unless the root of the image is changed, your conditions will not change. You will go in for incarnation after incarnation of choosing the wrong women, the wrong men, of having the wrong children. Not that any children can really be wrong. Of making the wrong friends, of making the right enemies, to keep us miserable, that is. And so on. We will repeat the pattern continuously, because whatever image we hold, this is what automatically is created. And where we get caught up, you see, is in not realizing this, because we look in too short an area. We look within a month or a year or several years of a life, and we think justice doesn't rule the universe. But this isn't true. You look at a whole lifetime, and you'll see it if you know how to look. It doesn't even need looking at several lifetimes, actually. You really just need one, knowing how to look. And you'll see that the habitual images held, even if somebody says, I am such a marvelous aspirant, nobody understands me because I'm so very shy. And the reason I'm all alone is mainly because I'm so sensitive. Now that sounds like a nice picture that one has of oneself, and lots of people have that. But suppose you tried to analyze that down, what would you discover? That I am so shy. Now don't get me wrong. It really means that you're so self-conscious that you can't forget yourself in order to think and love another and want to make them comfortable and happy. Isn't that right? If you were more concerned with keeping them happy and comfortable and relaxed, what time would you have to be self-conscious? Your consciousness wouldn't turn, because when you're being so shy, you know what you're really doing? Gee, I wonder how many I'm going to lose next Sunday now. Well, we all do. Well, people hate the truth, they say. I don't believe it. Not true aspirants, anyway. True aspirants don't. But anyway, when we're being shy, what we're really indicating, in all ways, is that we are in a sort of exalted self-meditation of, gee, what effect am I making? I wonder if they see that my nose is in the right shape. Maybe they see I have 1 3/4 gray hairs now. And ye gods, maybe they see that the muscles in my tummy aren't as strong as they ought to be and used to be. And maybe they see that I've lost 10 hairs since last week. And you see now what kind of an image making is this? We're so concerned with people seeing things that we think are so massively awful, so that they're not going to be able to love us, or like us, or accept us, or admire us, that we don't do a thing. All we do is keep intensifying an image that is going to inevitably bring more unhappy experiences. And then we moan and we say, why did this happen to me? After all, I've been kind. I've never wanted to injure anybody. Well, I felt like murdering a time or two when I got angry, but that's a little minor thing. I told a few people it dropped dead, but only part of me meant that. And if I didn't tell them, I wanted to. But on the whole, I'm a very lovely person. Why do these things happen to me? Look at this horrible so-and-so, and look at the wonderful life that person has, we'll say. And you know what the wonderful life is? They may have 2 cars or 3 cars instead of 1 car or no car. And they might have a half a dozen or a dozen suits instead of just a worn-out couple of suits or 1 suit. And so we look at a surface picture that shows us nothing, and we say, and look what they've got. And we don't even know how to look at what we've got, let alone what someone else has. Now, the use of tarot, if it is really used, and it is so simple, this is one of the things that's strange about true growth, is that the actual method is simple, though it takes perseverance. And it takes perseverance, this is true, along with a capacity to understand levels that are a little higher than we've been accustomed to. But if we're ready for these next levels, it'll come. The point is that with the tarot symbolism, we accomplish 2 things. This is the psychology of illumination. What is it to illumine a room? If a room is dark, you put light into it, right? Then that which you didn't see, you have seen. The term illumination is exactly what it indicates. You throw light on a subject and you see. So illumination, spiritually speaking, is having light thrown on a larger area than we've seen before. But the point is we have to throw the light, and no one else can do it for us. And we can only throw the light if we get busy with the images and start recognizing we have to throw the light into our own being and see what's doing there. Then once we see, instead of getting down and moaning and groaning, as I pointed out in an example or 2, I hope I did, we have to say to ourselves, aha! So this is the way I've been doing it. Well, how very clever of the immature me, but let's start doing it the more mature, satisfying, and fulfilling way. Who needs fulfillment by having to go off into this dramatization of tears and thinking of myself as being so spiritual because I'm the path of the lonely ones, to you know where with the lonely ones. Let's be full of the richness of unity, of love, of friendship, of goodwill, because I need what everyone else has, they need what I've got. Let's do this, and together really reach to something worthwhile. The images then, if they are to be changed, have to be changed deliberately. They don't change automatically. We get to a point in our evolution where we must switch these images in order to get out of the groove. That's the whole secret. And when we have each other reaching together, working together, when we're using methods, like our Kabbalistic chant, for instance, you've no idea the things that this is aimed at doing and does when you work regularly. Those who've come regularly know that your friends haven't recognized you, the ones you had, say, a year or 2 years ago. In fact, you've lost most of them, haven't you, poor darlings? But the point is, you've gotten new ones. You suddenly discovered you needed them like you need a hole in the head. and you've been forming new ones, more in harmony with your growth patterns. So we grow towards our own capacity, then we keep going with those who approach us. And then we each feed the other, and we each need the other to do it together. This is the reason for group work, as I've explained to you before and will in other ways. And then, as we use the tarot imagery, these changes take place in our own mental and emotional reactions, so that then our lives change. Then we start experiencing really the riches and fulfillment. The sunrise and the sunset becomes something fantastically mystical, mysterious, real, and yet beyond conception. The taste of anything that we eat becomes a participation with God, a mystic participation in the interrelationship and the nourishment of the love of God. The odors that we inhale becomes an inhaling of divinity and life, so that we inhale each other back and forth with glory and with beauty. Our senses become enhanced, not because we are becoming materialistic, but because we are spiritualizing that which is meant to be, because we are transmuting our basic image patterns and our reactions to life and to matter and to images. And our touch, it becomes so sensitized, we start feeling the warmth, we start feeling the beauty, we start feeling the emanations of another individual or a creature or sun or breeze. And everything takes on more and more magic. Why? Because in changing our imagery, we have opened ourselves up to an enlarged and an illumined, the idea of illumination, an illumined point of view. We have actually illumined our own inner being, our ability to see, think, feel, taste, touch. And by so doing, we have heightened and enriched the world soul. We are participating in the divine intention. We are helping to evolve this world and the universe by evolving ourselves. And we stop being miserable. Therefore, remember, illumination does not mean you have to be unhappy or miserable. It means you illumine the dark recesses of your soul and mind and heart, and bring it awareness of the riches that it is and has the capacity for. And in the imagery of the tarot, you tune yourselves to the others who are working with you and who have attained beyond your present age. We're all different ages. And therefore you receive their help. And while you're working this way, you're giving the help to those who are reaching on the vibratory level a little below you. We are a being walking towards the light of God, and you are participating in it. Let's walk together then with extra love. Let's hold our hearts in extra receptivity. Let's reach out our fingertips to touch each other with an extra awareness that we are touching a part of divinity, and let our hearts wash with gratitude that our consciousness is becoming so much more enriched. And tomorrow will surely take care of itself, indeed, when we let the past bury its dead. Isn't that a good idea? God bless you. Let's make today glorious.